for my 11th general heathen topic tonight, the issue of priests. I think it's really two issues. Did the ancient heathens have priests, and do we need them today? Which could also be put another way. What did the ancient heathens see as the role of a priest, and what do we use them for today? Put like that, I think we can see that it's not necessarily so that all ancient heathen societies had what we would recognize today as priests. The Icelandic Goða, the most clearly known example, were already more judges and chieftains in historic times. In theory, there had been Goða in Norway before they left, but one has to wonder whether we would recognize these people as priests if we ran into them, even if we went back about 100 years before their settlement of Iceland. They ran the things, but they were not necessarily the same people who had large enough farms to have the hops, or if they were, that was hardly really a priestly qualification. It was a matter of wealth and influence. Caesar had said earlier that the Germanic tribes didn't have druids. Now, on the surface of it, that statement is pathetic. Obviously, they didn't have druids, since druids are a Celtic institution. But he may or may not have been seeing that they didn't really have priests of the type that he recognized from back home in Rome, either. It's entirely possible, especially if the typical form of group worship in ancient heathenry started off with the slaughter of the animal in bloat, and then proceeded to the feast or vetsla, and then to the lengthy drinking party with toasts, that there was no leader. One person slaughtered, and either the same person or another person read the omens from the blood, but after that you didn't really need a leader. These are not rites of the type of the Roman Catholic Mass, where someone has to intercede and perform large parts of the ritual on his own, nor were they of any other type that we might recognize as communal worship, where someone has to lead and orchestrate and plan. In the modern world, whereas most of us recognize that heathens can and do bloat alone, when we come together in a communal bloat, what one tends to see is an assumption that it has to be orchestrated, that there has to be a leader. In many cases, it's felt that it's not a proper bloat if it isn't extensively planned, so you get readings and possibly even processions, and people are walking around with pieces of paper detailing what they're supposed to do and words that they need to read. This is based on the ritual of religions that most of us were raised in, that were planned and literate and depended on a kind of ceremonial that did have to be planned out in advance and that did have to be choreographed. There's also an underlying feeling derived ultimately from Catholicism and Judaism that one person has to be the leader. It isn't necessarily so in heathenry. A group of people around a fire passing a horn don't really need an elaborate choreographed ritual. That is a ritual. And they don't necessarily need someone to decide when it's going to start or to give the orders. However, most of us have a deep feeling that we do need some kind of priests. many olds made a useful separation of priestly tasks or types of priests. If I remember correctly, her classification was into a managerial and bloat-leading type of clergy, teaching and counseling type of clergy, and dedicated to the gods and deeply religious type of clergy. And she made the point that our expectations as to which type is most likely to be needed run directly counter to those of the ancient heathens, because they really didn't need teaching in heathenry. They'd grown up in it. It was all around them. And they weren't used to having extensive counseling services. You never read in the sagas, and Olaf went off and got counseled by the Godi. But this is an important expectation of many moderns. Most, I would say. Our needs are fundamentally different from those of the ancient heathens. Also, if you put those three sets of tasks together, you get a pretty mighty load for one person, or even for a couple. So, in my estimation, we need to do a couple of things. We need to decouple our needs from what the ancient heathens did with regards to clergy. They may not even have had clergy as we would recognize them, but that doesn't matter. Our needs are apparently quite different in this respect. And secondly, we need to give hefty thought to how to either separate these tasks or find some way of sharing some of them so that we don't hopelessly overload those people we have who are willing and able to become heathen clergy.